The language of a government is an important indicator of its plans and policy. On the topic of America's southern border, the language of the Trump administration has been clear since day one, that the thousands of migrants attempting to enter the country every year constitutes an invasion, one that requires a military response. Now, that response has come, with thousands of troops deploying southwards thanks to a perceived loophole in federal law. An action that sparked serious concerns about what the future holds for migrants and citizens alike. Welcome to the Politics of New America, exploring and explaining the policies of the American government in an age of radical change. On today's show, how the Trump administration is setting a trap for migrants at the Mexican border, and how deploying the military to police the area challenges important legal norms that have stood for well over a century. I'm your host, Nathan Stone, and with me is show producer Josh Carmody.
It's not... Oh, God, where am I going with this? I think it's just even more upsetting than the wall he wanted in the first administration. It was like, keep them out. And now it seems like, hunt them down before they can leave.
There is an aggressiveness that certainly wasn't as prevalent, I think, in the first Trump administration. And this administration, for all of its, I want to call it showmanship, flooding the zone, keeping us on our toes, just being absolutely wild, they have worked to move their plans forward in a way that the first Trump administration never has. And what we've seen since inauguration has really felt like speed running policy that like a 3-year-old who just needs to tell you everything at once, right? This is how this administration feels. But things around migrants have been getting very concerning, very dangerous. And this particular little tidbit that we're going to talk about today is something that has a lot of repercussions and might turn into something that is, on the whole, a lot more authoritarian than we've seen so far. So let's start off. As always, I like to dive into the history a little bit. And Josh, I know you're a movie guy. Mm-hmm. We've been friends for a while, and you know I've had the great opportunity to talk with you about movies for a long time. And one thing I don't think I've ever asked you though is what are your feelings on Westerns?
I like Westerns. I haven't watched a lot of them. Like if we're thinking John Wayne and things, I don't know. Stagecoach I've watched, but outside of Stagecoach, which is, kind of a universal classic, I haven't watched like a bunch of John Wayne movies or even Unforgiven. So there's a lot of classics I haven't seen, but of the Westerns that I have watched, I do enjoy. I'm kind of more of a Lone Ranger type of guy. So, I've listened to some Lone Ranger radio dramas. So I'm a little off the beaten path. Some Wild West, if you will, which I have watched some episodes of the original show. Upsetting racial stuff right away.
Of course.
It shows its age immediately.
Well, I think you've probably seen enough to know the basics of what goes into a Western. Of course, we've got usually some kind of outlaw gang. Mm-hmm. We have a well-meaning but overwhelmed sheriff sometimes. And when that situation arises in Westerns, the sheriff has a very special power.
He shoots him.
Well, yeah. However, when he needs backup, he's going to call in a posse, right? You go down to the local saloon, you find some rough and tumble fellas that'll help you, and you deputize them as a posse. And believe it or not, that is kind of at the heart of everything that we're talking about today, is what in the world is a posse, and why is the military involved? Well, this goes back quite some ways, and the origin of posse, it's a shortened version of two words, posse comitatus. It's a Latin phrase meaning the power of the county. It's describing a group of citizens who are called upon to assist a sheriff in keeping the peace, to conduct a rescue or to apprehend a criminal.
Which in its definition sounds far nobler than basically any version depicted I've ever seen. Yeah. They're usually all power hungry, like the last few guys in town that they can manage to like be persuaded to do something for the law, but then they're going to make the law work for them, you know.
And there is an act that has stood since 1878 called the Posse Comitatus Act. And this act forbids the federal government from using the military for domestic policing. Mm-hmm. That is the heart of this act. And the history of it goes back all the way to two major milestones in American history. First, the Civil War. So much of what we understand about American politics today even has its roots in the big North-South divide of the Civil War. After the Civil War, during the Reconstruction, there was federal troops occupying all of the southern states. Now, the southern states really didn't like that, but they also didn't have a choice. So you lose a war, you get occupied. It happens. And so it was deeply unpopular in the South. And so this act was kind of championed originally by Southern politicians who wanted to say, oh, wait. That whole secession thing, water under the bridge. Don't worry about it. Get the troops out of here. They should be off fighting foreigners. They shouldn't be here policing us.
Yeah, the South will what? No, I never heard anything about that. South will rise. South will rise. They'll do what? No,
they'll rise again?
That's not happening.
I mean, that sounds good, but like I've never heard that. Yeah. However, it gained national popularity after the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. So to understand this, basically what happened was when the Civil War ended, there was a real boom in railroad construction throughout the newly reunited United States. And the railroads were a huge employer. They're actually the second largest employer outside of agriculture, basically subsistence farming. Mm-hmm. So it was an industry that employed a tremendous amount of young American men. And it required a lot of capital. Railroads were expensive to build.
Yeah.
And so with that massive amount of capital came a lot of financial risk. And what happened was a good old bubble formed. Because with capitalism, there's always one button. It's very much like the bubbles that we've seen in our lifetime. They popped. And so speculation in railroads was rampant. People were just pumping money into this because it was great returns for a while. However, when the bubble popped, it threw a lot of people out of work. It threw a lot of people, or it made a lot of people lose a lot of money. And so the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was those railroad workers who were not getting paid anymore. Everything was in limbo for them. And this is well before the era of any kind of welfare, unemployment insurance, anything like that. So,
oh yeah, well this is before Henry Ford figured out that if you just only work them 5 days a week, they're not going to kill you. So
yeah, exactly.
There's no worker protections at this time at all.
No, there are not. And so it spread across multiple states, this general strike. It was only put down after 52 days by state militias, the National Guard, and also federal army troops. Over 100 people were killed when they put these strikers down. And this was a national issue that made national headlines. Public opinion started to turn very much against involving the military in any kind of domestic police action. Mm-hmm. And it made sense, and it has made sense since then, because one of the things that you can say about American policing, which is that it has so many problems that we can't even begin to get into, probably needs its own dedicated podcast, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah.
The military is always the worst option of the two,
Yeah.
between police and military. They're not trained for it. They're trained to meet aggression with aggression. It's not the kind of thing where you want these guys, dealing with high pressure situations in which they're trying to de-escalate.
Yeah, and as you said about the police, it's already kind of bad enough that people when they get into policing are often not given jobs where they grew up. So they're disconnected from the community they end up working in, which creates a boundary of us and them. Doesn't work out.
Absolutely. So in response to this 1877 strike and the pressure from the southern states to get federal troops off of their lawn, the Posse Comitatus Act was passed. And this would serve to separate the federal forces, the army, from any sort of domestic action, except in extraordinary circumstances, which we'll get to later. That was a teaser, folks.
Can you say martial law?
Oh, yeah. So this act has, for the most part, worked. There hasn't been many times in American history where the government has had to deploy troops domestically to help in policing. Just a couple of examples of times where it was used, because there are exceptions to this act. One was to send federal troops into Little Rock, Arkansas, during school desegregation in 1957. There was a giant crisis around it. Certain places just flat out refused to desegregate, and there was worry of violence from basically white supremacist militias.
Mm-hmm.
So the president at the time, Eisenhower, used an exception in this to bring in troops for that. And what we have here is a framework that protects Americans from their own military, which is a really nice thing to have. So why are we talking about it today? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The first one being a recent memorandum. And this is like an executive order, like a proclamation. It's kind of the third wheel of that particular tricycle. And this memorandum was for the Secretary of Defense, as well as the Secretary of the Interior, Agriculture, and Homeland Security. And it gives them marching orders, basically. And this Trump signed on April 7th, I believe. And this is, the title of this one is Military Mission for Sealing the Southern Border of the United States and Repelling Invasions. Again, the Trump administration has taken a very militaristic tone with especially the southern border.
Yep.
Talk of invasions, listing cartels as terrorist organizations. What they've been doing is kind of setting the groundwork for military intervention in some way or other. And this memorandum kind of gives us a little bit more of a look of what their game plan is going to be. In this memorandum, Trump directs the military to take a more active role. He says, the complexity of the current situation requires that our military take a more direct role in securing the southern border than in the recent past. And I assigned the armed forces of the United States the military missions of repelling the invasion and sealing the United States southern border from unlawful entry to maintain the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security of the United States. This memorandum provides additional guidance on securing the southern border to the heads of certain executive departments. Now,
So what does this look like? Because you already have border patrol, you have ICE, you have all the people. Is there a different organization that's working the kind of customs? Like, so there's already multiple organizations. Like, is this just a truck pulls up with dudes that have guns? Like, is it just a show of force in some way? Are they actively talking to people? What does this look like?
so this is very specifically targeted. In a lot of ways, it is for show. So we'll get to that. But what he's doing here by sending the military to the southern border is not legal usually. However, what I'm always kind of impressed by, I'll say, is that this administration has some very smart people who are very up on their history, especially a history of United States law. And so they find creative ways to get around the problems that they find. And the way that they have found to deploy the military legally to the southern border, because border controls, that is a domestic policing. Military can't do that.
Yeah.
Not in their purview. It's violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. However, there is a strip of land, very, very small in terms of width, but very, very long. It's called the Roosevelt Reservation. It's federal land, and it runs from California to all the way across Arizona and stops at the border with Texas by El Paso. And it's about a third of the total length of the American-Mexican border. Now, it's called the Roosevelt Reservation because President Roosevelt earmarked this land as federal land in case of border security issues. President Roosevelt was in power a lot closer to the Mexican-American War than we are today. So his thinking on it was probably more of like a future conflict with Mexico as opposed to an immigration crisis.
We can't have these Zorros popping up. We gotta have this border.
So it's only 60 feet wide, but it's very long. It's 632 miles or 1,017 kilometers, and it's all owned entirely by the federal government. Now, it doesn't extend into Texas because part of Texas coming into the Union, basically they have their own thing going on there, and also the Texas government over the years has privatized most of the land around their border, so it just doesn't apply to them.
Yeah.
However, it does apply to this kind of 33% of the border area of with Mexico. And what Trump has done with this memorandum, and what he's instructed the Secretary of Defense to do, is to take custody of this land for the Department of Defense, for the military. And that's very important because, firstly, that means that as military property, they can station troops there. But it also means that anyone who crosses any part of that line, instead of just hopping over the border, which is illegal, but, if you're picked up by Border Patrol, right, you can ask for asylum. There are ways that you can you have some recourse, right?
It's not a felony.
No.
To be an illegal alien
Yeah.
in America. It's not a felony. It's a I think it would be considered a misdemeanor.
Now, instead, what happens is if someone crosses the border, they're now trespassing on military property, which means that the military has the authority to place them in custody. So you turned the military into the police for this huge expanse of the border by simply declaring it as a military zone or military property. That's not all, though. So one thing that you kind of touched on before, Josh, is that there are other agencies. There's Border Patrol, there's ICE. Those agencies work within a certain framework. The military has its own framework. What the Trump administration is looking to do is to insert the military into the immigration game, basically, as far as deportations, as far as policing go. And the reason why they're doing this is because ICE and Border Patrol, they just don't have the resources for what Trump wants to do.
Yeah.
All right? This kind of Fortress America approach doesn't have the manpower. There's only, I think the estimate is around 6,000 ICE, trying to remember the word, the members of ICE that go and knock on doors and conduct these raids. There's only about 6,000 or so of them in the country. Mm-hmm. To run a deportation campaign as grand as what Trump has promised, you need way more than that. It's not even close to what you would actually need.
Yeah.
So part of the worry around this whole thing is that by normalizing the military in a policing role when it comes to migrants, we're on a slippery slope that will lead to the military in American cities conducting their own raids and used against the American populace. Now, we're still a little bit of a ways from that. Maybe less so depending on when you hear this, because there's some big news that might be coming up. But what you should know as well is, other than building infrastructure along this Roosevelt reservation, militarizing it, and kind of setting this trap where if anyone comes, the military can snatch them up and put them in military custody.
Because being technically correct is the best kind of correct.
Is that they're also, the administration, looking at adding migrant detention centers to military bases. And so what that means is, if you were to try and cross the border as a migrant and you accidentally chose this wrong point, mm-hmm. you could be taken by the military to a military installation to whatever fate awaits you without any of the normal safeguards that come through the usual channels of enforcement, right? And what we're already seeing is the military being used in deportations and relocations. It's not really a deportation if you take them to a foreign prison, but what we've been seeing is Venezuelan alleged gang members being shipped to El Salvador. There's been a few shipped to Guantanamo, and some of these have been done with military aircraft, right, with military personnel there. This integration of the military into this immigration framework is really continuing apace. Now, it's not all going swimmingly for the administration. One thing is that everything military costs more.
Yeah, didn't they load up a plane full of people and sent them off, and then they wouldn't let the plane land hands, so it cost like 5 times what it would have cost to just put them on a commercial flight that would have landed.
Yeah. There's been a few reports of it basically costing somewhere in the vicinity of $20,000 to ship a person to one of these detention centers. There's a lot here that just can't be done at scale yet, which is why I think we're seeing this impetus to up the concentration of these detention centers in the United States, because it's much cheaper to just hold them there.
Yeah.
Now, one of the places that they are really building up capacity is Fort Bliss. That is in Texas, in West Texas, by El Paso, and it's building kind of these large tent areas that could house 1,000 or more migrants. And a lot of the ideas around this is to apprehend, collect, and in some way disperse to whatever fate awaits them, all with using the military. So it's really worrying, because we've already seen ICE make some awful decisions and awful mistakes.
Yeah.
Border Patrol seems to have embraced the ethos of being tough and being very quick to judge people on whether or not they should be allowed into the country. When you get the military involved, it kind of reaches another level.
Producer Hannah here. Currently, the space is not in use. If you would like to hear your ad here at the beginning or at the end of the show, you can contact us at hauntedmouseproductions@gmail.com. Back to the show.
Now, one of the things, as part of this new immigration system, the Trump administration, they are looking to spend tens of billions of dollars, and they want to, they really want to scale up their detention centers in terms of population and how many and how long they can hold people for. And the reason that they're doing this on a large scale is because the system that is already in place is almost to capacity.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways.
Well, they tried to send some people to Guantanamo, and they were
Yes.
like, "Oh, I didn't realize this only holds like 6,000 people, if that. It's a surprisingly small number for such a famous place." But they sent like way too many, and then they just sent them all back. Another kind of wasting of money as well. But no, you're saying instead he's like, "I want to concentrate the people in an area with camping tents, and we'll come up with a name for it later."
A little bit, yeah. There are some interesting parallels to other points in history, I think. So now I want to throw a wrench in all of this. And one of the things I don't like to speculate a lot on this show, I like to kind of speak to what's happening more than what might happen. However, I don't think any of this is about the border. Even though we've had the memorandum, we've had this deployment to the Roosevelt Reservation, and the reason why I think this is because border crossings have fallen off a cliff in the last several months. Basically, as soon as Trump won the election, things started to decline, and they've declined precipitously since then.
And they weren't as dramatic before he got elected either. There was a whole thing on the Texas-Mexico border where people were going down there expecting to see this flood of people just walking over barbed wire and not caring for anything. And then they got there and nothing was happening. And even they had to admit on the news, they're like, "Oh, it's not what I thought it was." So,
well, the last year of Biden's presidency in 2024 saw a pretty big decline between kind of just over this course of the calendar year from about, 250 to 300,000 crossings in a month. And I say crossings, it's also encounters.
Yeah.
So we don't have pinpoint data to say this many people crossed the border, but the encounters is kind of a catch-all term. And it dropped all the way, close down to about 100,000, which was what we were seeing kind of at the start of kind of the Trump era. Although even December, 2024 was not too bad. Since then, however, the latest data from March, 11,000.
Which is dramatically
about 90%.
Wild, yeah.
90% from what had already fallen by 2/3, right? And you could make the argument that 11,000 is still a lot of people, and it is.
Yeah.
It is. It is a drop in the bucket compared to the height of it. So the timing of this deployment to the southern border is off. If it had been that 300,000.
Yeah.
Okay, you can make a pretty compelling case. But if your policies and your tough on immigration stance has already, without a whole lot of extra action, led to this precipitous decline, you're already winning, right?
Yeah, it's quite the dramatic action. It's disproportionate, I think, is the word that I'm looking for, in terms of, this is like flooding your entire house to wash one cup.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. You've kind of seemed to have weathered the storm. And let's be fair to migrants as well. When someone sets off on this journey, they're probably paying attention to American news.
Yeah.
Right? You would think, like, these people aren't spawning in out of nowhere like a video game, right? These are people who have planned to make this journey. And when Trump won, they knew that was going to get a whole lot harder. So a lot of people decided to not do it or try somewhere else, or, change their plans. And so now what we have is a much, much smaller crisis, if you still want to call it a crisis. And they're ramping up the militarization of the border. Okay, if it's not about the border, well, what is this about? I believe this is about using the military to cover for shortfallings, specifically in ICE, by having them take on domestic policing roles when it comes to immigration. I think what we're most likely to see here, and for the audience, we are recording this on April 17th. In 3 days, the president will get a report. And that report will either tell him that it will recommend to him that he should either use the Alien Insurrection Act to allow him to deploy the military as a domestic police force, or he will get a recommendation to not do that. And so that is...
He loves recommendations. He
He does. He does. So the Insurrection Act, and if this goes through, we will be doing an episode on it because it's very interesting. It was originally enacted in 1792, so it's one of those old laws that Republicans love. They just love them.
Again, technically correct. They love technically correct.
Yes. And so it overrules the Posse Comitatus Act that forbids the U.S. military from engaging in policing. However, this act is so old, and it hasn't actually been updated in over 150 years, that it's left up to the president's discretion. And so it's one of those powers that he doesn't need Congress for. And the Insurrection Act, if we go through it, the act itself is going to take us like 3 minutes because it's very short. Mm-hmm. The problem with things that are very short is that they're very ill-defined.
Yeah. You can put whatever spin of interpretation you want on it.
Exactly.
It's, not broad.
Basically, it tells the president that he has the power to use and call in the military to help with domestic policing in times of insurrection, rebellion, domestic violence. However, it fails to define any of those terms in the act itself. And so what we're left with is a very broad, sweeping, powerful rule that is at the president's discretion. If he chooses to go with this, he will open the door to what would be kind of a full deputization of the military by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, ICE. And that would allow him to get by the shortfalls of the just staffing ICE. But when we put it together with everything that we've talked about today, with the building of more detention centers, with the streamlining of how they want or seem to want to have the military kind of take care of all of this without any of it going to due process, without the courts getting involved, right? It's one thing when the police pick someone up, right? They have all sorts of regulations they have to follow. There's all sorts of rights you have to worry about. When the military picks you up, there's a much better chance of people disappearing, right? Yeah. Into this system that they're building separately from the original infrastructure. And it's the kind of thing where I hate to use slippery slope, but oh my, this opens up so many cans of worms in terms of personal freedoms and authoritarian action that it, I think, will have as profound an effect on American life as we've seen Trump's tariffs already have, right? That kind of huge paradigm shift.
I think a term I would like our listeners to be familiar with, because I think it describes perfectly what's happening here, is hyper-normalization. So I'll quickly prattle this off. The hyper-normalization is the acceptance and normalization of a distorted or simplified version of reality. And so where we talked about that the border crossings are way, 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 way down to very low levels and insanely low levels compared to what they were when he was campaigning and talking about that we need to stop this. But now they're not talking about that. They're talking about ramping everything up. So there is this distortion of reality and then this normalization of using the military for these things, for these border patrol efforts. And that's why I think people should know about hypernormalization, which is exactly what's happening. They're eventually it's going to become a part of daily life if they keep getting away with things like this.
Absolutely. And we're shockingly close from a legal standpoint to seeing just armed patrols of soldiers on the street, maybe checking papers.
Yeah.
Right? Making sure you're who you're supposed to be. And I think if you're a person of color, especially in the United States, it's got to be very concerning because we've already seen a disregard for due process and facts just facts about people.
Yeah. And this has gone on for years, so the ramping up of it is just going to get worse. It can only get worse, obviously. But if we go back, because I'm going to talk about a movie real quick, because that's what I do. There was a movie in the 80s called Born in East L.A. that starred Cheech Marin. And in it, he is a man of Mexican descent who was born in Los Angeles, but he continuously keeps getting deported into Mexico because they don't believe him. Now, that's something played for laughs 40 some odd years ago. Guess where we are now? It's not funny.
No, it's really, really not. And so, listeners, you already have a better sense right now than we do of if this is moving forward.
Yeah.
Because the April 20th is the deadline for that, and we will see action, I would think, swiftly if this is going to go through. And everything that I've seen leads me to believe that this is a pre-planned set of actions, and that the Alien Insurrection Act will be invoked, and we'll have to see what the immediate fallout of it is in terms of military deployments, in terms of political backlash, right? This is an area I feel like if the Democrats were ever going to step up and take leadership, this would be a really solid issue for them to do that on. But right now, on the 17th, we can't say. So look forward to doing a whole episode on the Alien Insurrection Act, if and when that comes to pass.
Yeah.
But I think that's going to about do it for our show today. And as always, we hope that we've provided you with a little insight and clarity around the policies and actions of the American government. On behalf of myself and Josh, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Politics of New America.
This has been a Haunted Mouse production. Cut that out.